Well, good morning. Alzheimer's Australia, for those of you who don't know much about us, was formed about 33 years ago by small groups of carers at the state level, first of all in WA. So we were a grassroots organisation formed by carers who were desperately anxious to find services and to promote information that would help them care better for people with dementia in the community. My background, as Bill says, is public service, and I worked in the health department actually from 85 through to 93. And in 1985 I chaired the Nursing Homes and Hostels Review and helped implement the wave of reforms that brought HAC and ACATS and SAM and CAM and other things that those of you old enough to remember will remember. So my attitude to government, I guess, has never been hostile, but it's been one of partnership. And everything I say assumes that, in my view, NGOs work effectively when they work as partners of government. And I guess that's one of the central things that will come through in what I say. So, as I've said, we started off as a care organisation. It wasn't until 2000, which is hard to believe, that we actually became inclusive of people with dementia, which says something about the stigma that attaches to dementia. So from 2000 onwards, which is in fact when I joined the organisation, people with dementia started to self-advocate, speak at our conferences, and are hugely important, in fact, in terms of emotionally moving the argument along about people with dementia still being full citizens of our society. I think it would be true to say too that in 2012 we were a pretty conservative organisation in terms of media. The odd media release crept out. That was about it. We had no publications, no intellectual capital, no website. The states and territories have about 600 staff between them, so we did at that stage, and we still do, have lots of resources at the state level to deliver services, mainly contracted from government. And that helps our credibility as an organisation, because I guess the second message from me in what I say is I think that the success of our organisation, and possibly most organisations in the social arena, really depends on what I would call consumer credibility and government genuinely being convinced that you aren't talking as bureaucrats of organisations, but seriously representing them, and preferably empowering your constituency to speak for themselves. I suppose, even though I've been in my job 12 years now, I remain of the view that we need a revolution rather than evolution in the areas of policy that I'm most interested in, which is aged care through disabilities through to mental health. And I think one of the things that interests me most is the common agendas that those areas actually have between them in terms of consumer empowerment and bringing care back into the community, if you like, as themes. So, why do I think we in fact do need to be agents of change and go for revolution? In my area, it's because of stereotyping, loss of rights, stigma, social isolation, things that probably many of you are aware about or aware of already. So we've dramatically changed the way we advocate over the last couple of years, and that's really the focus of what I'm going to say to you today. And those strategies really have four main elements. One is the development of intellectual capital and an information base. The second is to establish what the main drivers of change are from a consumer organisation point of view, and to be very focused in what we argue for in the endless submissions that we put to government. So there may be endless submissions, but they have a very common focus and a common theme and common information base. The third thing that's been very important in our area is actually to change the way people think. Again, this may sound strange to some of you, but in Australia, dementia has been entirely seen as a matter for aged care. If I write to the Minister for Health about primary care, it goes to the aged care division. If I write to him about hospitals, it goes to the aged care division. There's been no perception that dementia, as well as being a social and support issue, is actually a health issue. And our big successes in recent times, which I'll tell you a bit more about, is actually changing the way people think about dementia to being a chronic disease and not simply a natural part of aging. And the fourth thing I want to talk a little bit about is communication, because it's all very well to have ideas, but you have to communicate them. And the big things that have happened to us in the last couple of years are actually bringing together marketing and branding together with social media and communications in a way that we wouldn't even have dreamt of back in 2000. So the way we think, as well as the way we deliver our messages, has really been revolutionized in recent times. I guess in this audience I don't need to persuade you about the wonders of databases and intellectual capital. I suppose one of the things I want to leave you with is a thought. It actually took us about 10 years to develop the information base we've got now. And if you do go to our website at all and look at publications, you'll find about 30 numbered publications. You'll find about 8 reports from Access Economics. You'll find specialist publications on the quality of dementia care. None of those were there in 2000. Our database is owned by the government, so when we say there's 300,000 people with dementia today and about 1 million by the middle of this century and 1,600 new cases every week, the government quotes the same figures. We've succeeded over the 10 years, 12 years, in ensuring that government uses our data to persuade themselves that the case is a good one. And the most seminal report of those was probably the 2003 Access Economics report, the Dementia Economic and Social Impact and Positive Solutions for Australia, which actually not only told the government what the problem was, but also told them what the answer was. And I suppose that's important in advocacy, because the first question you get asked by the media, having told them doom and disaster, is, well, what do you want to do about it? And you have to be able to say very precisely what it is you do want to do about it. And the doorstop is a bit of a joke in terms of your 30-second messaging, but if you can't do that, then you're really not going to succeed. So, from that 2003 report, intellectual capital, the interest of the Howard government, led to Australia being the first country in the world to actually adopt, at the national level, a dementia policy. We were the first. The French, the British, Koreans, and others since have adopted national policies. They're all a bit different. The coverage is different. Some specialise in research, some focus on services. But the point is that the Access report in 2003 and its intellectual base established the case for national action through a coordinated plan. And that was seminal. The range of our interests extends from dementia and sexuality, gays and lesbians and dementia, end-of-life issues, euthanasia, the evidence base for preventative health, dementia risk reduction, consumer-directed care, and so on. So the intellectual base is absolutely critical, and I'll leave that one there for now. Okay, I mentioned at the beginning that as a consumer organisation, we have to establish our own credentials for what it is that we want in aged care reform and for dementia care. And what I'd like to do is just briefly, because you could do seminars on each of these, what I want to do is identify what I think are the main drivers from a consumer perspective in actually driving aged care reform and thinking about dementia care in Australia. The first one is empowering consumers. I find it remarkable that as a country we've whittled on about person-centred care for the best part of 20 years and never wondered why it doesn't work. And it doesn't work essentially because it's a one-way partnership. The consumer has very little power. So unless you actually have consumers empowered to be equal to the service provider in identifying the service needs, how those service needs are going to be met, and when and where they're going to be met, the consumer really is not going to be positioned to get the services and support they need. It sounds obvious, but it's taken a long while for that message to creep through in a serious way to government policy. Since 1985, the rhetoric has been older people want to stay in their homes. 25% of national resources in aged care go to community services and about 75% to residential care. Despite the rhetoric, the emphasis has been on residential care services until relatively recent times in terms of the politics of the aged care sector. We produced our first consumer-directed care document about 2000, 2001, courtesy of Dr. Anna Howe. A very good document, still worth a read actually. And it took us 10 years, not by ourselves, obviously with others, to actually get consumer-directed care into Commonwealth aged care packages. So advocacy is like water dripping on a stone. It takes a long time. Between 2000 and now, we had seminars across Australia. We had Americans out here telling us about their evaluations of CDC across the globe. Those were the ways in which we communicated what we thought was an important message. And an important part of that was actually having seminars inside the Department of Health about consumer-directed care to persuade them what the policy logic was of thinking in terms of consumer empowerment. Developing flexible community services, well, I won't say too much about that. It's obviously important that we expand community services if people are going to have those options in the community. We've put a lot of priority into respite care because respite care is demonstrated to be more important to carers of people with dementia than for any other kinds of carers, people with disabilities and so on. So in that case, just to give you an example of how we advocate, seeing that the department weren't doing too much, we offered to write a review for them on respite care with the help of Anna Howe. So we hope by the end of this month to present a report to the department on respite care that will try and address two objectives. One is how you make the services more flexible for consumers to use, help the service providers, and secondly, how do you empower consumers to have greater choice in respite care through the use of budget holding or cash or whatever other strategies you might think about. But the important point of that example is that in terms of the way I think of partnership with the department, we don't just say, well, you know, here's a job that needs to be done, or this is something you should do. We quite often say, well, we'll do it for you, and let me say we do it at about 10% of the cost of consultants, or maybe even universities. Monitoring the quality of dementia care and aged care, consumers really have no idea what the quality of services are that they're looking at, absolutely no idea. Residential care providers will say, we have a dementia-specific unit. Well, what does that mean? They have a secure unit. Oh, that sounds nice. What does that mean? There is nothing in the system that will demonstrate for a consumer what the quality is of the community care or the residential care they may want to choose for the person that they're caring for. So from our perspective as a care organisation, consumer organisation, we think it's very important to actually put energy and effort into outcome indicators that will actually help consumers know more about what they're looking at. That is complex, but I'm not sure it's as complex as bureaucrats and others have made it seem. It's an area where we're certainly going to volunteer to government to do quite a lot of work. We're working with Bupa Care Services on what consumers are looking for in residential care, and then we've kindly offered to Bupa that we will send in consumer teams to monitor their standards against what consumers have identified as priorities to see how that actually works out in an effort that we can actually see on the ground through the eyes of consumers what the things are that they would look for in terms of residential care. And the last one, getting research into practice, is probably something you can sympathise with. We know a lot about what good dementia care is. It's quite clear that it's not happening in the community. people like Professor Bradati, Professor Mary Mittleman and others have written elegantly on what's involved in delivering quality care that makes a difference to the lives of the carer and the person with dementia. It's quite clear if you look at the recent controversies about the use of antipsychotic medications in residential care that about 20% of the people that are getting those medications probably benefit from them. The other 80% are probably at risk of their lives. So things like antipsychotic medications, polypharmacy, are issues that we're desperately interested in. We succeeded in getting $3 million from Bupa Care Services and ANZ Wicking Trust to actually do knowledge translation ourselves. And our model is beguilingly simple but complicated in practice. And it's beguilingly simple in that it's consumers that set the care need priorities. We have a consumer dementia research network across Australia with 26 people with dementia and family carers. They think about care, they think about priorities. We then go to the researchers and we say, well, what's your evidence base in these areas of greatest concern? Do you think we can do something there? And then we go to a community of practice of service providers and say, well, what do you think? And then we tender for projects, and the consumers decide which of the projects get up. In the first round, we had 45 applications, and the consumers were very businesslike. They selected 2. In the next round, they selected 6. So that's just another example of how we can advocate through action, through research, getting research into practice, building up our credibility, not just as a consumer organisation, having consumers decide things, but also getting the evidence into practice. The Living Longer, Living Better package, I don't know how much of that you know. I think all I want to say about that is enough to persuade you that our advocacy was quite effective. The first Productivity Commission report on care for the ageing had hardly a reference to dementia or to respite care. It had a lot on consumer-directed care. It had a lot on evidence-based practice and other things we cared about in terms of changing the aged care system, but very little in respect to dementia. The final report of the Productivity Commission report was equally disappointing in terms of dementia. It did have a little bit more on respite, and a lot of the principles we cared about in terms of consumer empowerment and changing some of the financing of the system were there. We asked the department and the minister if we could actually do our own consultations on aged care reform. So we got money to go around Australia to every state capital and some regional capitals and rural areas, asking the question, what do you think of the aged care system? And getting people to tell their stories. And we recorded all their stories, and we produced a publication. And we gave it to the department, and you know what happens sometimes with departments, the report disappears. Anyway, I got a phone call on the Thursday before Good Friday from the Minister's office saying, we've got your report and we're going to release it on Easter Monday. Well, that was goodbye to the Easter weekend as we polished up our media releases and got ready for the report. The Minister's political judgment was better than mine. We actually got an audience of 16 million people on the Monday with that report. I did 34 interviews across Australia, every television and radio station, and we had our CEOs and ITA out on the track as well. Another example of partnership. In none of that were we hostile to the government. We did tell the truth. We said that the aged care system was failing. And the end result of all of that in terms of outcomes, which is what we have to deal with as advocates, was that we actually got, in the Living Longer, Living Better aged care package, a commitment to tackle timely diagnosis of dementia in the health system for the first time with funding. We got funding for looking at training hospital staff in dementia care. That was the first. We got funding for a dementia risk reduction program over 3 years, $4 million. There's, for the first time, a government commitment to provide linked workers and support for younger people with dementia. And there are various initiatives as part of the aged care package which are actually there to help with the quality of dementia care in the community and residential care. We didn't get everything we wanted in terms of funding, but the important thing is that the messages about the health system being as critical as the aged care system got through, the funding was there, and we now have a policy framework that makes a difference. And we now have Commonwealth and state ministers agreeing that dementia is a national health priority area alongside cancer and heart for the first time, which is something we first advocated for in 2002. So for us, not for many perhaps, the 2012 budget was quite a positive. And I think it directly reflected that partnership approach and that consumer credibility approach and the focus on consumer issues that I've been trying to emphasize. I'll come now to what I think is a critical bit too. We succeeded in getting pro bono assistance from Interbrand, who are a multinational branding company, and from Porto Novelli, who are a public relations company. And the two stories actually came together. We worked with Interbrand for about 18 months, and I thought, oh, you know, this is consultants all over again. You talk forever, you tell them all your stuff, and they feed it back to you. But they actually took time to get to know us. And they asked us at intervals what it was we wanted to achieve. So I said I wanted a bloody great explosion. So that got written into the text that we actually wanted something to make people think differently about dementia. And the end result of that was the slogan, Fight Dementia. The notion that you could actually do something about dementia. It wasn't inevitable, you could beat it, you could take it on, and if you had research, you had good quality care, you could make a bit of a difference in our society. That was the thought. And the good thing about the marketing and branding strategy, and of course I'll take the credit for everything coming together beautifully, was that marketing and branding actually came together with our Fight Dementia campaign. So we decided to march on Parliament House, not bad for a Conservative organisation, led by ITA and Sue Hawke and others, on the 13th of October last year, I think it was. And that came together with the new brand, the new livery. You see all these sort of icons and slogans and things. And that has been immensely powerful, I think. We now use strategies that I think are quite sophisticated by any standard. So that's Interbrand, Fight Alzheimer's, Love Australia, Fight Alzheimer's, Save Australia. That was the march on the 13th of October. Another slogan, Understand Alzheimer's, Educate Australia, Stop Alzheimer's, Go Australia. And we use those different word plays in different situations depending on whether we're educating, hassling, or whatever we happen to be doing around the place. So we can tailor our logo and word slogans around the messaging that we're trying to achieve. We did quite a lot of innovative things too with the help of Porto Novelli. We had an electronic advent calendar at Christmas. We had a campaign to send cards to the Prime Minister and Leader of Opposition on Valentine's Day, and about 7,500 odd cards arrived in Parliament House. So look, what I'm trying to say is that not only do we use conventional media quite well in terms of the 16 million that I mentioned before, through conventional electronic media, we're actually using social media now in very active ways. We've got 50 federal members and senators signed up as dementia champions. We had none 9 months ago. So we've got 50 out of 230 federal politicians on our website, photographs, messages of support to Alzheimer's Australia. We're not asking them for money. We just want them to remember us when they're in their caucus and their party rooms talking about policy issues. So what else can I tell you about that? So through Facebook, at the time of the Valentine's Day card, we reached 300,000 people on Facebook, 89,000 people on Twitter. And all of that stuff goes on. I mean, in the recent Dementia Awareness Week, we had 3 reports come out, actually. Stigma from a report on dementia and stigma, the launch of Your Brain Matters, our new risk reduction program, and the AIHW report on dementia in Australia, which attracted a lot of media interest and helped us a lot in attracting a large audience. So, those are some of the outcomes I've told you about. So we regularly, with the cooperation of the media, get really huge audiences. You have every right to say, well, have we achieved enough to justify my enthusiasm for what we do? I think that it's a great achievement that we are now a national health priority area alongside cancer and heart. It changes the whole psychology of the way we talk about the issue. It changes the way that the Standing Council of Health Ministers will hopefully approach the new National Action Plan on dementia, which they're supposed to bring out next year. The Living Longer, Living Better package has about $260 million worth of expenditure on dementia. That isn't actually the critical part in many ways. As I've said, it's the policy context that's also very important. And we celebrated at the altar when we got some funding from one of the health programs in the department to do our dementia risk reduction program and not just the aged care program. So where to now? The Fight Dementia campaign goes on because we didn't get any money for research. We want to actually reduce the future numbers of people with dementia. So we're advocating for 200 million over 5 years for dementia research to build capacity for the future in terms of researchers, for projects, and for infrastructure and for knowledge translation. Dementia attracts about $24 million a year through the National Health and Medical Research Council. Cancer gets about 160 million, heart about 90 million. But if you look at prevalence, if you look at disability burden, if you look at cost, then on any criteria, if you're looking at the future, dementia should be up there with those other chronic diseases, because we know that by 2060, if we don't actually find a better solution to modifying the progression of dementia, dementia will actually be the largest cost area in the health system. That's a very good question, and some people have been a bit upset by Fight Dementia. Partly because it sounded so out of character with the way they think an NGO should be. And partly some have said, well, Glenn, we know you're concerned about health, but don't become too medical. Don't allow yourself to be taken over from the important social and support objectives you have. And I guess that is an issue for us. I mean, in the short term, there aren't going to be medical interventions that are going to make very much difference. In fact, quite the opposite. I mean, the speeches that we're doing for ITRA at the moment are anti-medicine because of polypharmacy and the dangerous drugs that get fed to older people without much thought, it seems, on many occasions. So look, I think the risks are there. We're certainly not letting go of the notions of social engagement, social support as being critical. Our whole view about the design of respite care, for example, is that that has to be designed around the person with dementia as well as around the family carer. But your point's a very important one. I don't want to hand my problems to the medical fraternity. At the same time, we do actually need their engagement. Somebody starting out with dementia will go to their GP. We know that 95% of Australians will go to their GP for advice if they're worried about their memory. And we know that it takes 3 to 4 years to get a diagnosis. And if you don't have a diagnosis, you don't get help in the system. So while I think we have to be cautious in our embrace of medical science and the fighting dementia words, the other thing to remember is, and I'm still a novice at branding, the other thing to remember is that our brand is going to last for 10 years. I mean, we've got a brand that is adaptive and evolving, and we want to move from dark to light. So the brand might look quite different in its colours and even its language by the time we get to 2020. Well, I'd like to say education and training, but I'm not sure I quite believe that. I might say funding mechanisms like, DRGs and subacute areas that don't always have incentives pointed the right way for handling people with dementia. I think it reflects your concern that so many people move from hospital into residential care, presumably because they don't have that transition path. I mean, I like to be optimistic. I mean, we're actually finding now through our social media activity that we're reaching quite different people from those we would have reached 2 years ago. And we're only at the beginning of that process. And we're trying very hard, in fact, to engage the whole of society in our issue, not just those who are 40 plus or 50 plus who start to be in the danger zone. We're doing some work with the AIHW looking at the impact of dementia on the acute care sector. So we're looking at the economic impact, which I think people know is severe and significant. But by documenting, as we did in that 2003 report, I'm hoping that we can light a bit of a fuse under the acute care sector to show that it's in their interest, actually, to show much more interest in who's got cognitive impairment in their environments, because they often don't know. So there's no recognition system, let alone coordination of care for people with dementia. And that same report, going to my other point of always having reports with solutions as well as problems, will look at strategies that exist worldwide, insofar as evidence-based stuff exists, as to what the strategies are. So those are some of the things we're trying to do. I mean, the acute care sector for us, the primary care sector for us, are very new animals. And we're starting to get our hands dirty talking to the department, talking to doctors, only slowly appreciating just how difficult it is. So I'm not sure that my problems are necessarily going to be with younger people per se. I think community attitudes to dementia are an issue, and I hope our broader campaign will help persuade people that there are positive things that can be done in terms of quality of care, in terms of risk reduction, in terms of research. But we haven't got very much positive. We really don't. And if I go on talkback radio, I'm still asked, well, what's the difference between Alzheimer's disease and dementia? There's still an expectation that if you have a diagnosis of dementia, you're scheduled for residential care the next day. So those attitudes, are ingrained. We've got a long way to go, but education and training is a good way to go. But getting aged care, let alone dementia, into the syllabuses of tertiary institutions, you know more about than I do. And in your own area, I mean, I always thought we were an over-regulated country. People moan about Australian regulations. When you actually want to use the regulations to do something useful, as in dangerous medications, it's absolutely impossible. So I have a room full of people, as we did yesterday with the Minister, talking about antipsychotics and what you can do about it. And any lever you want to pull, you're told it's impossible. It all comes down to clinical practice and doctor's judgment and don't touch this, you'll bring the world down around your shoulders. So very difficult, but I think it's a very good question. And I think transition care programs, the emphasis on subacute, are the things we've got to look at. Over my 12 years, I've had some particular friends. I'm sorry the doctors have been friends. AMA have been very helpful politically. ANF have been out on the streets with us, doing marches and being very supportive across Australia. Carers Australia have been very helpful to us. So we've had, and I've been a founder member of the National Aged Care Alliance, and without, I mean, I have an interest in aged care as well as dementia, so I tend to advocate for a range of things there, not just for dementia. So I think the important word you used in your question is, do we have a sort of stakeholder system? No, we don't. And I was listening to Dawn O'Neill talk yesterday at the Mental Health Council of Australia about what she called collective impact models in the United States. And while I don't think that is actually terribly different from things we try to do, the difference was it was a much more formalised way of bringing groups of stakeholders together to say, this is our joint challenge, this is what we're going to do together, these are the resources we're going to put into it, and this is what we're going to do. We don't do that, and I'm not sure that too many NGOs do. And probably, if I had to take a guess at where we'd be in 10 years' time, there'd be more systematic collective endeavour in that kind of way. When I think about disabilities and mental health and ageing, it seems to me we've got two things in common that if we had the political strength or will to do it, would actually be very powerful. All three sectors believe in consumer empowerment, and we all believe in various types of consumer-directed care, from cashing out through to better planning of care services. And we all believe in taking care back into the community, and we all have a desperate disappointment, I think, that the health reforms resulted in a greater emphasis on acute care and institutional care than community care. And I think it would be rather lovely, actually, if those three sectors could get together in a collective way to actually argue the importance of the community sector and take it from being a sort of Cinderella, part-time, Meals on Wheels thing to something which it really is, which is a sophisticated system of support for people who want to live in the community. So I think that's a very important question, so thank you for asking. Most of what we do are front-end community care services, so they're around information, counselling, support groups, living with memory loss programs, education and training both for formal carers and for informal carers. Some of our states do run respite services. Some do provide care packages, but not extensively. So WA would in fact be very hands-on in terms of respite. Tasmania would be quite hands-on in terms of community care packages, and that kind of reflects local interest. Remember, we're a federation, and the miracle is we do work together, and we work together very well. But each of the states has their own service history. I think I'd make 2 points to you. One is that as national CEO, services for me are simply a means to an end of consumer credibility. To my states and services colleagues, they're life and death. They love their toys, they do great things, they're with consumers, they're doing good works. For me, say our services were worth $30 million a year. What is that in terms of an aged care budget of about $10 billion? So for me, the services and the activities of the organisation are important to advocacy only in the sense that they make me credible in terms of understanding the issues, and because our consumers value those services and their stakeholders, and they're our social movement on the ground in telling the story of dementia to politicians and the wider community. So those interconnections in our organisation are important. In terms of research, we have a separate research company at the national level that I'm the company secretary of that grants about 1.5 million a year in terms of research grants. That's nowhere near where we should be, but it's grown about 4 times in the last 5 years. We'd be about 70% government dependent. That's about right, and that's national funding for the Department of Health and Ageing. That all comes through me, so I subcontract to the states and territories. So even though we're a federal organisation, the states can't actually avoid me and I can't avoid them. So the money comes through me, so we work together in the services area. The states and territories will get some funding from HAC, and some states do much better than that than others, because some states are much more HAC oriented, if you like Victoria than others. Slowly, and New South Wales and Victoria being the bigger states fundraise, but not so much through large donors, much more through direct mail or bequests from clients or whatever. Some of that will have to change. Nationally, I don't fundraise actively at all. But checks keep coming through the post, so we're obviously doing something right in terms of community perceptions. The other day, just to tell you a nice story, I had $1 million pop through the letterbox, and it was from a Swiss institution. And I thought, God, this must be April Fool's Day, what's going on here? So I said to Nikki, run down to the bank with this and we can see whether this hops down to Bateman's Bay or where it's off to. Anyway, NAB, of course, wouldn't clear a cheque within 6 weeks, so they had to wait 6 weeks to find out. But yes, it was genuine. And this was a cheque from a Swiss foundation that gives money every year to 3 worthwhile organisations it thinks is doing good work. I don't know how they got hold of my name, but they're welcome to it any time. So that's exceptional. But the point I want to make is that at the moment we are government dependent. That's the main answer to you. The risk reduction program that we've got gives us new opportunities for naming rights to banks, Coles, health insurance agencies or others maybe. Not so much for the money as far as I'm concerned, although the money would be nice. It's much more actually to use the networks of large institutions to get our message out and to do what the lady was saying down there, which is to change attitudes to dementia. We've got a national consumer advisory committee. We've got state-level advocacy committees that really feed the membership of the national group. We've got a national cross-cultural dementia network. We've got a national Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander group. We've got our consumer dementia research network. So we've got a lot of activity going on. And I think it's empowering. For example, I don't take a policy document ever to the board. In fact, I very rarely take it to the states and territories these days. I go to the consumer bodies. So they genuinely are hands-on, and they don't really play word games. They genuinely are interested in the content. So I don't spend hours redrafting things. They tend to come up with ideas which work really well. Those networks are in part funded by government, so we're quite lucky. The Dementia Collaborative Research Centres fund our Consumer Dementia Research Network. We couldn't afford to bring together 26 people twice a year, as well as the teleconference, without that support. We always take consumers to meetings with ministers to speak at the openings of our events around the countryside. It's hard to I mean, I don't know. I mean, the thing I enjoy about policy is making it in public. So I quite enjoy going out with ideas and coming back with something different, slightly different, a little bit different. You never quite know. So the respite stuff that we're doing at the moment is fascinating. We've had huge amounts of interest from service providers as well as consumers. So we've had roomfuls of people around the place really wanting to put their views to us. I mean, I think if you consult in the right way, you do get very positive feedback. I'm desperately trying to think of things that have been seminal in sort of changing our thinking dramatically, but maybe it's more a process of evolution and roads to Damascus and our relationship. I mean, we're about to do things that we should have done years ago with consumer pressure, and that is to look at the legal rights of people with dementia. We've never had the money to do that. We hope we're going to get a couple of 100,000 to drive that as a consumer piece of research in the community, supported by legal people, but consumers very much in charge of it. And a lot of our policy work is like that. I mean, the consumers are sitting on top of it. And I think it's the reason why the department listened to us. I mean, I don't think departments are very good at consulting by and large. They don't understand people need respite care to get to meetings, or they need 2 months' notice and those sorts of things. I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but that process of dialogue and recognising you can always learn something new, I think, is the characteristic of a good consumer organisation. You're really learning all the time. When I was dealing with Michael Waldridge and we were making his life an absolute misery on Alzheimer's medications, he stood up in public and congratulated us on intelligent lobbying. And I think that thought of intelligent lobbying is an important one, because there's no point in kicking the guts out of anybody now, like nobody likes that. But if you do it in an intelligent way with the facts and the evidence, I think too the strategy of actually working with the department, as we are at the moment on respite care. I mean, they're slightly nervous about what we're up to in the community and what we're writing and so on. But we've said to them, look, this is an input to your work. Nobody's going to publish it until you're happy. You can come to the consultations, do whatever you like. So I think we're non-threatening in that way. I never put out a press release, even minor ones, without sending it to the Minister's office or the department. I never release a report, whether it's international or domestic, without giving it to the department a couple of weeks in advance. Minister Butler's advice to us last May, that's May 2011, after we had a really disappointing budget in 2011, was that now we had ITRA's president go out and tell his story. And he supported us. He came to the march. The Prime Minister's office played the game on Valentine's Day and sent out nice tweets and things that made a difference, so did Tony Abbott. So I think we set out to make friends of people rather than enemies, while being, I think, pretty passionate and determined to get what we want. I mean, the government knows we're not going to go away, but if we don't get it this year, we'll get it next year. It's worked pretty well. So I've never felt threatened. I can think of one marginal occasion by somebody who wasn't in the government actually, but in Parliament, who made some nasty remarks about one of my CEOs and their backgrounds. But really that's the only occasion in 12 years which isn't bad.